Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today's April 14th, 2022. It is 9 o'clock a.m. Central in the United States. That's where I am located right now. So our topic today, this is our Implementing Acquisitions in Alma series, and we are in week 4, receiving print resources and post-receiving processing. We are using WebEx for our we're using WebEx for our session here. Remember, if you ever encounter any audio or video issues, just exit and rejoin WebEx. We are recording the meeting and it'll be made available on the series dashboard. And then if you have any questions, please send them to all panelists. That way Cynthia can see them and I can see them. And that helps me. She'll try to answer things during the session that can be answered. And then for anything that can't, I'll add things that are and aren't answered to the Q&A doc. That'll be uploaded on the series dashboard as well. So we're in week 4 of 6. So we're more than halfway through, and at the end of today, we've got just 2 more weeks. Next week, we'll be talking about invoicing, and then the last week is kind of where, remember, I'm doing everything very manually. And that last week, we'll talk about tools that you have to automate this process. So you're not doing double work in multiple systems, using imports, exports, those kinds of tools. So this is our agenda for this week. We'll take a quick peek at workflow and operator roles. And then moving into, we'll receive our physical resources. And then we'll talk about post-receiving processing, some things you need to do, and a couple configuration choices you might make depending on your workflow and the size of your library and the size of your team working on this stuff. So starting with workflow and operator roles, I redid my little workflow slide here. So we're still on step 4. Last week, we talked about activating electronic resources. This week, we're talking about receiving print resources. So we do spend a little bit of time on here, but this is a pretty important part of the process. Roles related to receiving physical resources. We have receiving operator and then also receiving operator limited. You only need one of them. And remember, when a role is limited, it is indeed a subset of the roles. And so the receiving operator limited role does not have the privilege of editing PO lines or changing item information. So if you need that kind of limitation, you can assign that role instead of receiving operator. But both of these roles do need the assignment of a service unit. Where does this person work? Where does this person log in? Because that drives the drop-down list in Alma, and I'll show you that when we get in there. Remember my rules to live by: let Alma do the work for you and don't make things more complicated than they need to be. So let's move into, I did start the recording. Thank you for the reminder. I have forgotten before. So let's get into receiving physical resources. Okay, depending on your organization and practices at your institution, how you proceed through receiving and invoicing may vary. If you have 2 people, one person doing receiving and another person doing invoicing, that's one possible workflow. Other times, at other libraries, if the same person is doing both receiving and invoicing, you may consider, instead of receiving and then invoicing, you may choose to create your invoices and receive off of invoices. So that is not a bad option. It's just, it can save some time if that same person is doing both steps in your acquisitions workflow. So, but what I'm going to be doing is I'll be receiving and then we'll be invoicing next week. When you go to receive physical items, you have to make sure you're in a receiving department And that role and the scope is what determines that receiving department shows here in the drop-down menu on Alma. By default, your acquisitions department is already a receiving department. When your environment is configured, that's already set up. Depending on your library, you may choose to make your circ desk configured to be a receiving department. And I just want you to keep that in mind right now. And we'll talk about a couple of scenarios and how to do it later in the session, when it really kind of hits you as to why you might really want to do that. Once you're in your receiving department, you navigate to the receiving workbench under acquisitions, receiving and invoicing, receive. And when you get in here, at the top of the screen, you'll notice this one-time or continuous. These are two separate tabs. And so one-time firm orders will show up on this one-time tab, and any continuous orders, any subscriptions, they'll show up on the continuous tab for receiving. Another thing to pay attention on this screen is this little keep in department, and then this will be a drop down here next to it. And that keep in department checkbox and menu, the reason we have that is you use that when materials will remain in tech services for cataloging and processing. What it does is, as you receive the item, instead of it going straight to the shelf, you mark that keep in department. And what Alma does is it creates an acquisitions work order, and that ACK work order was also already created in your environment. We talked about that week 1. You don't change it, you don't delete it. You can change the name of it, but not the code. And what happens is the item, like right now when the items are on order, their base status is not in place and their process type is acquisitions. When you receive the item and keep it in department, the process type changes to acquisition tech services, and really, but it's still not in place. And so, and then so that's telling your staff it's in the bag. You know, we're working on it, we're getting it out to the shelf. And then that process status, this list here, this drop-down list, this tracks an item's location in tech services. So this list you can customize, you can, how many stops do you have back in tech services? And the whole benefit is for you and your staff to be able to put your hands on material. So again, do with that list what you need. This is broken down in this environment to copy cataloging, original cataloging, physical processing, repair and temp storage. Do what you need there. And where you customize that is you go into the ACK work order and you manage the statuses. And you just change that list. So let me go show you that very quickly. Expand that out. Big, general, work order types. Here's that ACK work order, and I'm at the institution level because this is that institution level. You manage statuses, and you can remove these and add new ones. That's where you do that. Okay. So that's kind of the background of what we're looking at. Now, when it's time to check items, check item or receive items, you've got your shipment, you've opened them up, you've double checked your counts, you sit down at Alma, you make sure you're in the receiving location, you go to the one-time tab, verify your keep in department and status setting, and then you search for your items and receive them. As you search for your items, you can either click receive from the row action menu, or you could, if you have multiple items showing on screen that you need to check in, you can check the boxes over here and up at the top of the screen, click receive. That's how that works. So let's go over to Alma and do that. So I'm in my receiving location. Remember how I can, I'm at CERC because I was testing something out. I'm glad I looked. Now, if you're not at a receiving location and you try to go to receive, Alma's gonna bark at you. No acquisitions department was selected. So say, nope, not right. And since I have the roles to go to different places, so let me go to my tech services. So now I'm in tech services and boom, it opened up. This is called the receiving workbench. That's where we are. So when I got to that, acquisitions, receiving and invoicing, receive. Now, as you look at these, you can see if any are rush or there's interested users. So that flag is right here if someone was entered on the PO line as an interested user. That might be a flag to, push these through processing a little bit quicker since someone's waiting for them or potentially someone's waiting for them. Now you can filter. You'll see some different filters here, including filter orders with patron requests, with interested users, locate PO lines, and the status. So status of sent, by having this limited down to status of sent, those are things you know you're waiting to come in instead of having this be all. So sent is a little bit of a filtered list here, but I think it's a helpful place. So, and you can search by PO numbers, you can search by titles, now the difference between title and title starts with is important. If you have title here and you don't enter all of the 245A, Alma barks at you. It doesn't find it. So you might want to go to title starts with, or just leave it at all. That works as well. So Sunday Morning Quilts was one of my books. And here it is, and I can just go receive. If your packing list has PO numbers on it, or PO line numbers, I'm sorry, 8460, I can also do that. So if you have that benefit, and then, oh, look, this has an interested user. So my other option is to check boxes over there and click receive. It does the same thing. And one more 15 minutes of play. Okay. So I've received those oh no, I didn't keep any of those in department. Oh, I blew up my examples. Okay, I'll have to use other ones that are in department to move through. Okay, that lesson learned. Since I didn't use keep in department, all of those are on the shelf. And I would have to place a work order to get them off the shelf and back into tech services. So a very good lesson for me. I forgot to double check that before I checked those in. So let me get out of here and let me just use some others here. I know I've got some older ones that I'll use. Okay, we're going to use Avenue of Spies, receive. Write these down. And Valiant Ambition. Okay, there we go. I've got a couple in copy cataloging that I can work through. So that was receiving our one-time orders. Broke my own rule. I did not verify my keep in department and status setting. So if keep in department was not checked when the item was received, its base status is item in place. So Alma already thinks it's on the shelf. And so for certain situations, that's exactly what you're going to want. If keep in department was checked when the item was received, the base status is item not in place because the items are in the acquisitions department for further processing. If that interested user was added to the PO line at the time of ordering, you'll see that little green check mark. Might want to fast track that item through processing. Okay, so that's receiving our one-time orders. Someone said or transit, right? Actually, when you receive, it doesn't go in transit. It goes to on shelf. Now, I'd have to test. I'd have to test if this item is going to a different library. Like if I have centralized AC, does it? Ew. I'll have to check that. On shelf to another library. I just need to double check that because if I go back, actually a good thing to look at here. So if I go to, I forget if I put all these in the main library. See, permanent location. Oh, it did do transit. Usually I'm used to these going, okay. Edit item in transit to main library. It used to go directly on shelf without. Because with my history's taken a while. So it is in transit. Interesting. Because with my serials, with my continuous orders, that's not going to happen. So in transit. Okay, I'm going to test that out a little bit more. Oh, now the history came up. I want to make sure that wasn't on hold. I don't think that one had the interested user. So let me close Teams. I have stuff popping up here on my screen. There we go. Okay, so when it comes, so that was receiving our one-time orders. So when it comes to receiving continuous orders, do issues that you receive for continuous orders like subscriptions need little to no processing? What you want to do then, if that's the case, is if you check them in and you check them in tech services, you receive them in tech services, you don't want to check keep in department. If you're just putting a quick property stamp and maybe or maybe not a barcode, you want them to be on shelf right away. So uncheck keep in department. If you do have processing, you can use that same method of keeping them in department, but typically those go to the shelf pretty quickly. Now, what I'm going to demonstrate here is the ad hoc method of receiving continuous orders. I'm not going to have time to demonstrate prediction patterns. We just don't have it in this amount of time. So we'll be talking about the ad hoc method of receiving, which is all you really need. You don't have to do prediction patterns. When you order a continuous resource, Alma, when it creates the inventory, it only creates the holding record. It does not create the item record. The item record gets created at the time of receipt. And then the frequency of the issues is set back on the PO line in the vendor information field at that subscription interval. This is how Alma can still do claiming without prediction patterns. It's relying on this value for ad hoc receiving to expect another issue to come in roughly every 30 days, roughly every 7 days, 60 days, 90 days. That value in that line from the PO line. So I've already verified my PO line that subscription interval is set to 30. So Alma says, okay, this is a monthly. Now, when I go to my receiving workbench, I'm going to make sure I'm at my receiving location. I'm going to go on my continuous tab and I'm going to verify my keep in department and status settings. And then search for my items. Now, when I go to receive this, I'm going to locate my title from the row action menu, click receive. I'm going to fill in my enumeration and chronology information and then click generate. And then if you need to assign a barcode, you click receive and set barcodes. If you don't assign barcodes or you have Alma assigning barcodes for you, create and receive is right here. The environment I'm using is set to automatically assign barcodes, but that's just the one I'm using. Okay, so let's go receive our first subscription or first issue from our subscription. Back in acquisitions, back on my receiving workbench. And these settings up here, the tab you're on, the keep in department settings, they're sticky. They stay here, they stay in place until you come back and change them. So I'm clicking on the continuous tab, I'm unchecking keep in department. And my title that we used was British Journal of Developmental Psychology. Sometimes I just see it and I don't even have to search for it, but I have to search. British Journal of Developmental Psychology. This is the one I want. So when I come in here and I click receive, so again, the first time I'm receiving this, I'm going to have to fill in all the information. This is the first issue I'm getting. Let's say we're in volume 37 and it's April. So we'll say it's issue 4 because this is a monthly. In our chronology, do you write the whole month out? Do you do APR period? You click generate. So what generate does is it takes this information that you've filled in, it brings it down into the description. Now the formatting of this description field is something we call description templates, and we'll look at that in a little bit. Notice I didn't put V period or NO period. I just put the data. Alma took the data and took the format that I have set up in this description field. This information is all going to transfer to the item record. So I filled in my information, I click generate, and I'll just click create and receive. If you click create and assign barcodes, it'll just give you an option to scan in a barcode. So that one's done. I click back, I go to my next issue. Check in, check in, check in. So now the first issue that you receive, Alma isn't doing you a lot of favors, but the second one is where you have a little more help. So let's say time has passed. It's now May. We're checking in our next issue. It's shown up. I search for my title. I come here to receive. Now what you do here is the last issue received shows up here in the top of the screen. So you just click duplicate, 5A, generate, create, receive. So it's just a very quick, and then, because I'd only be checking in one and then you go back. Let's say it's June, receive, duplicate, 6, AUN, generate, create, receive. So now we have our issues building up. That's how you will receive each issue. Now let's go back here to the PowerPoint. And I want to double check this because British Journal of Developmental Psychology. Because with those main periodicals, see, item is in place. Isn't that interesting? So for the continuation, Alma knows items in place where those one times they went in transit. So I have to double check that and test it out because I thought they all went to item in place. So it must make that differentiation between one time and continuous orders. Okay, so someone made a comment. This happens at our library too. Our library has centralized ACK. If it's going to a different library, it goes into transit in that library. Okay, our ACK department is offsite. When circulation scans, it should be in place. Correct. And we're going to see that a little bit later in our workflow. We will see that. I have a recurring order annual publication print that we want to receive last week, but it's not displaying under the continuous tab. What could cause this? PO line is still open, comes up with open orders. We're in an ACK department with a proper role. Looking on the continuous tab. I'd have to look at that example. I'd have to make sure the PO line type is correct, that it's a continuous. I'd have to look a little, I'd have to look a little deeper at that. So, but what we just saw, the serial issues go to in place and the one-time orders go to in transit. So I am going to do a little more testing and I'll make sure I write that up in the Q&A docs. Oh, someone made a comment. Check your filters when you're searching here. That's a super helpful, no, I don't want scan in items. When you're on the receiving workbench, check these filters here. And these filters are sticky. They are sticky. If I go back to one time, it sticks on sent. See how these stick separately versus these? So good to know, good to know. Okay, so we just did our ad hoc receiving. So like I said, that first issue, you do have to put everything in, but after that, pull it up, duplicate, generate, create. Now, what's nice about this is, so that description field and this enumeration information I mentioned will transfer to the item record. The description information field, that data being in that field is what determines, that makes this item unique compared to the next one in the holding. And that is what makes Alma would force an item level hold versus a title level hold by having any data in that description field. Doesn't matter what it is, but if there's something, some information, some text, a number, whatever, in that field, Alma says this is a unique item from its friend on the shelf, and it will need to be requested at that item level. So this description or this formatting I mentioned comes from what we call our description templates. And you get to those under config, resources, general, description templates. And they're built like a lot of other tools in Alma. Config, general, no. You know, sometimes, oh, this is another one of my favorite shortcuts. Sometimes I forget where things are. So I do Control Alt F, and then you could just search for Alma menus. And you don't have to remember where things are. Okay, so these are our description templates. Now the order of these matter. And I'm using this very first one, and I made the rule name to look kind of like it looks when in the description field. So if I go look at this, I gave it a name. I didn't give it a description. And then you have your input parameters. And so my rule here is that cron J is not empty. That might not be the best only qualifier, but I have it set up. I have it first in the list. I have it very intentionally set up that way. Additional parameters might be needed. But you can say, you know, why should Alma use this? And if you come in here, you know, contains in list, is empty, is not empty. Like the other qualifier kind of, when you're making fulfillment rules, the same kind of tool here. And then you fill out, like there's a V period with a space and then enumeration A. And then on this one, I put a space in front of NO and then NO period, space, enumeration B. And then I put a space in front of my parentheses. So these are blank back here. And then cron I, oops. And I put a space either here or here, I forget which one. And then cron J, close parentheses. And then you can do a quick show template and it'll show you what it looks like. So as you build templates, because everything might not have those 4 levels of enumeration and chronology, you can build additional templates, build your qualifiers, consider the order of them. Now this template is not following LC's formatting rules. LC's formatting rules doesn't have any spaces. And so you can make your templates look like those if you like. Completely up to you. It's your list. You can also assign sort routines. So that is how your issues will display, and you can control the order of display out in discovery. So you might want the newest on top. So you might want them in descending order. The physical resource editor items list. So when you pull up a list of items in Alma, do you want those ascending or descending? Which one do you want on top, newest or oldest? And then also acquisitions receiving items, receiving workbench in Alma. Do you again want that ascending or descending? So there's not a wrong answer, just whichever way you like. Now this is an institution-wide setting. It's not a setting for an individual person, but you adjust this under config, resources, general, physical item sort routines. Again, let's take a look at that. Config, resources, general, physical item sort routines. So here I have this one called discovery sort by enumeration. So when I set this up, I said make them descending and work off of enumeration A and enumeration B. Now you can work off of the description field if you like. That works just fine. That's just what I chose to do. And then on the display and options, use it for get it out in resource management and set it as the default. Now, receiving sort by enumeration. So maybe when I'm receiving, I want to see those in ascending order. I'm still sorting on the same thing. And then here in display option, acquisitions receiving, set as default. And maybe I want the physical item resource the same, so I could assign that here. I also want those ascending. Or you might want them descending. Again, just this is a setting you make across your institution. Okay, so that is Okay, so that is receiving our continuous items. So now we're going to talk about receiving our standing orders. So you don't receive them on the receiving workbench because remember how there's that bib record linked to the PO line. You may have suppressed it and no inventory was created in order. So what happens now in your library, does the person receive it and just hand it to cataloging? Do you have someone create a brief record and then hand it to cataloging? It's whatever would work in your environment. But then with the item, you can link the item to the PO line. So who's going to do this work and when? That's a workflow that you'll need to develop based on local staffing and practices and working with your whole department. So let me go back into Alma and I'm going to show you just kind of a sample workflow here. So one of my example for a standing order was like NOLO legal research. And so let's say I've got the material in my hand and I want to look it up. Let's clear that out. And I have, this is the one I have in my hand and I go to search it. I saw some strange behavior last night in Alma and I accessed it a different way. So I'm seeing if I still see the same information here. And I can take a look and say, which bib record do I want? Looks pretty good. I'll go ahead and import this. I saved my record. Okay, it must have been the way I was accessing this. Here's my new holding record. Here's my new item record. Now here on the item record, this is where I can link to the PO line. And if I know it, 8464, I can type it in. Oh, it wants the whole number. I think it's like POL-8464. Hello. Why that threw me out of there, but that linked it. And then I could have my receiving date of today. If you don't have the entire PO line, you could always do select from a list and do a quick search. 464. Make sure for that POL hyphen to be correct. So that's how that works. And then, we'll invoice it. We will invoice it. The caveat of this is when you're manually creating those records in the MD editor, the item is already in place. So this is another thing where you have to say, am I going to leave it in place and get it through cataloging kind of quickly? Am I going to need to place a work order on this to get it off the shelf for us to work on it back here? And I can't answer that for you. You'd have to look at your processes and see what works best in your library. Okay, looking at post-receiving processing. So we've received some items and they're back here in the receiving department. And remember how that process status is telling our staff where these are back here in the tech services department. So if I come back here and look at my receiving department items under acquisitions. So now when you're ready to, like if the cataloging, you're doing your cataloging on your materials now or your processing, I look at my list here, my process status, maybe I work in copy cataloging and I'm going through these. And here's my avenue of spies. And what I can do is I can take a look at this and say, this looks like a pretty good record. Okay, I don't need to do that. This can get sent on to, so I can edit. There's a couple ways I can do this. I can click edit here and that'll open up the work order and I can change this to physical processing, get it off my desk. And then I also had Valiant Ambition. This was another one. Another thing I could do is, let's say I've checked this and I've checked this one and they're both in good shape. So I can change their status here to physical processing and move them down the line. So that so you just want to keep this up to date with wherever these items are. And then when whoever is doing the physical processing, they come in here, maybe they're going to add a barcode. That was Avenue of Spies, and we'll also do Valiant Ambition. Six 17018. There we go. Save. So I've gotten all my processing done. I'm ready to send these out to the shelf. And some of them might be at my library, some might be sent to another library. And, in my scenario, I have a centralized ACT department. So when you're done, you will notice if I change the status up here, or if I try to change the status here, I have an option here for done, and that closes out the ACT work order. And we recommend against this just to make sure everything's graceful. And I haven't tested it recently, but the workflow we actually recommend is here under acquisitions. When you're done with your processing of materials, you go down here to post-receiving processing and you go to scan in items and you use this just to make sure any holds are trapped, routing is properly done. 6-1, and then you just scan your barcodes. Isn't that the one I did? I was getting this last night. 61701-1. No, 7. I thought I did 7 and 8. 61701-8. So marking it done. So this is sending it in transit to the graduate library. 61701-7. Oh, I have an extra. 61701-7. Gosh, I'm having a heck of a time. Okay, it doesn't like that one. It was Avenue of Spies. Let's go back and double check my barcode. The status up here doesn't matter. Marking it done is what matters here. Marking it, having this radio button here, what this does is it closes the work order and it makes it, let's go to receiving department items and edit. 61, oh, I have a typo, 617. These are old zip codes that I know. There we go. That's the problem. So acquisitions, scan in items. 61701-7. There we go. So marking it as done. That's what we need to do. So those are both on their way to the graduate library. So what that did is that put those materials in transit. And in order to get out of transit, they're going to need to be taken to that circ desk. So, and these went to the graduate library because that's where these live. And then I go to scan in items. So under fulfillment, you can, they'd get there, you'd go scan in items 61701-7 and 61701-8. And these would be trapped for a hold, sent to the shelves, whatever that next step is. But it does require that last step. So now some of you might say, oh, I don't want to do that second scan. So this slide's just talking about keeping that status updated again for you to be able to track where items are in tech services. And then this is the, when you're all done, under acquisitions, post-receiving processing, go to scan in items, mark this as done. But we recommend using that workflow. So out of the box in your environment, the ACT department and circ desks are separate. That initial scan, marking it done, places the item in transit to a circ desk, even if that circ desk is in the same building. The item barcode needs to be scanned again at the circ desk to update the status to item in place or trap an item for a request. You can, if you are a smaller library, the circ desk is a receiving, you can make your circ desk a receiving location, and then that single scan, when you mark the item as done, can places the item on the hold shelf, places the item on shelf or traps the hold. So it is one less scan, and in some instances, that's a good thing to do. If you're a smaller library, you might consider this workflow. This is set at the library level. So even if you're part of a larger institution, but maybe you have a law or a medical library that with its own ACT department, you can do that as well. Or maybe you are a library that you receive your own serial issues. So you could receive your serial issues at your library without them going through your central ACT location. And I have a link here to a knowledge article on our Customer Knowledge Center to update that configuration. I have a question that came in. We're having an issue when we receive items that have a hold box ticked for an interested user. We're getting an error message advising that the item could not be put on hold. Could this be because a separate acquisitions department for receiving and not the circ desk? No, it's not that. I've had that issue, and it's deeper than that. It might be the location of the item. It might be the fulfillment unit that doesn't allow it to place it on hold for the borrower. It's deeper. And it has to do with that. So you could open up a case and give the exact example, because we'd have to look at the item, we'd have to look at the borrower, we'd have to look at those rules. So open up a case with support to dig into the setting. And I've done that myself. The borrower's user group, the status of the item, all sorts of little things like that. What would happen if done is marked as no in the scan item page? Then you wouldn't be closing the work order and it would stay in the ACT department. All you would do is you'd if I go back to if you're ignoring this, then Alma's going to pay attention to this right here, set status to. I kind of wish that grayed out when you did that, but it doesn't. So yeah, as long as if you have this set to no, this is all you're going to be doing. Okay, so again, if you want to consider the reducing the number of scans, it's not good for everyone, but it's good for some people. I saw a lot of questions come in, and I will be taking a look at them when we get done. Oh, we still have 8 minutes, so okay. Is there anything, Cynthia, that I really need to go back and touch? Okay, someone asked, we work in Gobi to place orders. Can we load our Gobi order into Alma? Absolutely. And we're going to be talking about that the last week. So the last week, week 6, we'll be talking about the automation things you can do. So yes, definitely do that because you'll do the work in Gobi. You'll use an import profile and we'll look at those to load them into Alma. You'll do the work in one place.
Hi, Jenny. Maybe something about unreceived received item. I mean, that is possible also when you set a received item. The item can you so that it did some error, maybe you item or whatever can unreceive. But this only when you are in acquisition workbench still, and you have not to move other place. Just if you realize immediately an item, not here, receiving an item.
Oh, the receiving workbench?
Yeah, you can unreceive.
Oh, okay. You can unreceive. Okay, there are limitations.
Yeah.
Alma on. Okay. You can only unreceive items if they're still in the department. And there are no interested users.
Yeah.
So those are the qualifiers.
Yeah, just to know that it's possible, but when so once you have moved to another place, not in the acquisition department where you were, then it's not possible.
And look how I just searched this, and this is actually the SUNY group. This is their LibGuide, and they keep this up to date. And if you are a consortium yourself, they're a great resource because they talk about a lot of issues. They keep this up to date. There's a lot of good customer information. This is coming from us, knowledge.xlibrisgroup.com. And so unreceived for a PO line is the functionality always enabled. So this is a knowledge article. Knowledge articles are written by our staff, might be support, it might be implementation. They're questions we hear. And then here is the answer. And if there's an error or something, because like new functionality has changed something, you can just fill out this feedback form and it'll go right to the person that wrote it and they'll make the corrections. That's what I do all the time. Like that thing we saw about the deleting PO lines. I found the knowledge article. I sent the update. Whoever wrote it will correct it and take that line out. And look, oh, they put a video here. So like a little, probably a little video we put together for release notes to talk about unreceiving items. I'm glad to see a couple of the issues I had last night did not occur today. And I connected to the database differently. So I have to replicate those to see what is going on in our environment. Okay, anything else for us? Look, we got it just under an hour, which is where I really want to be. Next week, we're going to be talking about invoicing. We'll talk about one-time orders, continuous orders, invoicing from a file upload, payment and credit, and then monitoring ledgers and funds. Then the week after that, that's when we'll talk about more about EDI. Remember, if you find yourself in need of more customized training, workflow optimization, etc., these are paid services, but we have a premium services team that can be reached out, that can be contacted for quotes to see what you need. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it. I'm grabbing the chat right now so I don't lose it. And I've got some work to do on our Q&A docs, and I'll upload my PowerPoint right away so you can access this PowerPoint. Thank you so much for your time this week, and we'll see you next week. Thank you, Cynthia, for your help.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.